After they had drunk their fill of honey, they broke off several pieces of honeycomb, wrapped them in some nearby leaves, and stuffed it in their pouches and pockets, hoping to find a better place to eat it. As the collecting of delectable treats came to an end, they reached the horrible realization that they had left the path that they had initially had intended to follow to the Luminor, only for the sake of acquiring a little treat. There had already been so much food surrounding us. I should have kept my mouth shut, Angelica said. How do we get back now? She asked, a natural but puzzling question. Dylan started out by helping her climb back up the steep bank opposite from where the nest had been, and then said, I think we ran quite a way to the west, so if we head eastwards from here, we may make it back by nightfall. Angelica walked alongside Dylan at a much more comfortable pace on the way back. Sure enough, they made it to the path leading towards the meadow just as the sun was setting. The experience of being in a forest illuminated only by Luminor was completely new to Angelica, although not to Dylan. They had walked a lot that day and were now quite hungry, so they sat down on a rock. They sipped on the remaining honey, and when that was gone, they ate the honeycomb itself. When they were finished eating, the two of them lay down to sleep in the grass near each other. Dylan was used to adventure and fell asleep rather quickly, but Angelica wasn't, and it took her a while to fall asleep. Her first day in the wild after long years in the castle had been so much more than she had expected. She had also never slept near so valiant a warrior, always having slept alone. Eventually, she gazed into the starry sky. As she gazed into the starry sky, she nodded off into a dreamy sleep. Very early in the morning, Dylan set out to find something good for them to share for breakfast. Though he had been careful not to go too far away, he was nowhere to be seen when Angelica woke up. His absence worried her, because not only had she never been alone in such a foreign place, but she had desired his company and hoped he was safe. She started her day by climbing a shoot of foxtail grass to look for him, and as she hung there, looking around, she felt a gust of wind against her back. Dylan swooped in from behind her with a bunch of grapes in his talons and settled on the ground nearby. As he reverted to squirrel form, he called out, Angelica, I am back now. Have you been looking for me? I'm sorry I left you alone without giving any notice. I was trying to get us some breakfast. Angelica turned around and came down wailing. I was worried about you, and I didn't want to be alone, but thank you anyway for procuring good food for us to eat. She felt much better now that Dylan was here with her, and she was beginning to realize that she was already growing attached to him. I hope to continue traveling together after we get the Luminor, she said absent-mindedly. Dylan was overjoyed to hear the suggestion. I would love that, he answered, if it would please you. Angelica stretched her muscles and took notice of how sore her body was. Even while she was growing up in the castle, she had never been this fatigued from her exercise lessons. She felt refreshed, and she was glad to think that as she pressed onward, she would grow accustomed to the level of activity that came hand in hand with traveling. They took a short walk from where they had lain to sleep the night before until they found a good rock to sit on. When they got situated on the rock, Dylan noticed an apple tree towering overhead, with humongous apples dangling from its branches. He said, I could have found plenty of good food without going so far off in the other direction. I should have taken the time to look here before starting off. I'll be careful next time. Angelica told him, Don't worry about it anymore. We've got some wonderful grapes, thanks to your decision. Let's eat now before we get along on our way. Her attitude reassured Dylan, and they both took grapes from the bunch to eat. The first one Dylan had picked out was far bigger than his face, so Angelica giggled and tried comparing it to her pair of grapes, which were smaller. She said, "I wonder what could have caused that grape to be more than twice the size of the rest of the bunch. How are you going to eat it?" Her remark caused him to laugh. Presently, a beetle clumsily towed its way past them and stole Angelica's attention. She looked past it, her eyes wandered about the vividly colored forest, and she saw a stream nearby. "Once we finish eating, we should have a drink and resupply our flasks," she suggested. Although no longer in need of hydration, they both wanted to clear their mouths of the residual grape juice. Angelica and Dylan got off the rock and went over to get some water. The water tasted great because they had hardly drunk anything during the excitement of the day before. After their drink, Dylan helped to fill Angelica's flask, and she thanked him. The light of the rising sun streamed through the trees, and Angelica stared at flowers, on which the morning dew glistened beautifully, before they continued on their path. When Angelica and Dylan were ready to press on, they followed the path some more, until they met a small cliff, which would have been passable if not for what initially seemed to be ivy growing on it. At their approach, a hissing noise came from beneath the broad, spade-shaped leaves. Strange serpent-like vines began to slither throughout the interior of the wall of plants. While Angelica watched in shock, buds resembling snake heads poked out from behind the leaves, and an ominous rattling sound emanated from within. Dylan recognized Angelica's state and said, "This plant was not here before. But don't panic. Fear attracts serpent vines. They will bind you and eventually devour you, for they are another genus of carnivorous plant. If we stay calm, it should quiet down. Better yet, I see a way around it. Follow my lead." He began to climb up a stalk of a bean plant, winding his way over the serpent vine below. "If we go this way, it'll be safe. Come on." At first, she was reluctant to climb the vine because she was sure that she would fall. Then she decided to go ahead and try because Dylan seemed to believe in her ability to climb it. In the beginning, she had trouble winding her leg around the vine the way that Dylan had done. Once she became comfortable with climbing vertically, she was confident she would make it to the other side of the serpent vine. Although it took her much longer than Dylan to reach the end of the vine, she eventually made it there safely, and they were able to continue forward on the path towards their destination. "We're getting much closer to the meadow of the luminescent plants," Dylan told Angelica as they walked on. "What are luminescent plants?" she asked. "There is a plant known as Luminescea fabulum that climbs only on acacia trees," Dylan explained. "Over a long period, it accumulates sunlight reflected by Sarzana at night, and then excretes the liquidized essence of light from the tips of its lower stems. Another plant, called Geopsychus rosalis, often grows near it, possessing the ability to drain liquidity from a substance, leaving only the viscous essence, which eventually hardens like a rock. The second of these needs the pollination of a Rosacea genitarium plant. Only when these four plants are growing together can they produce luminor. When they're all together, we evoke feather called a collective family, luminescent plants. After some bends in the path, they encountered a flooded area, which eventually turned the trail into a river. Dylan said, "There was a storm last week, but even so, I have never seen this area impassable on foot." "I used to go swimming in the castle moat," Angelica said, as she sat on the bank and with her feet in the water. "This should be fun. It's been a long time." Dylan looking embarrassed, said, "I've never actually swum before. Perhaps it would be best if I flew from above." Angelica told him, "Don't be silly. It's not that hard. I can teach you. Grab a stick or something, and let's hop in." Unable to turn down the challenge, he seized a clump of fallen wood and jumped into the water. At first he kicked around, thinking he would drown, but the water was shallow, and the wood was much more buoyant than he had initially imagined. With some practice, although he had struggled frantically at first, he learned to float by letting his muscles relax and trusting the water to hold him up. "Good," Angelica said. "Now that you know you won't sink, just hold the wood out in front of you and kick like this." Demonstrating, she kicked her legs out the way like a frog would. "This will propel you forward. Just be sure to keep your head above the water." She pushed the water aside with an arm stroke that matched the motion of her legs, and she glided smoothly through the water. Dylan practiced moving back and forth for a while, in the way that she had instructed him. It was difficult at first for him to utilize the correct movements to pull himself forward, but after a while he realized that he could hold on to the wooden float with one hand and help to propel himself with his other. "Great! Now, once you've got the hang of that," Angelica advised, "just let go of the wood and use your other hand in the same way. The forward propulsion and the air in your lungs will keep you from sinking." He got to where he was about to bump his float into a cluster of lily pads when he mustered the courage to decide to let go of it and give his other hand to some use. If he hadn't done it when he did, he probably would have dislodged a river toad from its comfortable seat. Sensing this, the toad croaked loudly. Dylan's chunk of wood lingered amidst the lily pads, the cause of another croak. Dylan learned to swim with both hands. "I've got it now," he said. "You're a great teacher, Angelica. Thank you for showing me so simply how I can swim." They continued to swim until they finally reached the end of the flooded part of the path. Dylan was glad he knew how to swim now, but the opportunity to get back on his feet and walk, as he usually did, was reassuring. He was happy to get out of the water. Unfortunately, they had drenched their clothes. There was a large leafy hydrangea bush in bloom that they agreed to stand on either side of while their clothes dried. Several small saplings grew nearby, which they could also hang their clothes on. The foliage proved to serve as an adequate replacement for a changing room. Angelica and Dylan began setting their clothes on adjacent branches. When Angelica drained her skirt, she couldn't help but peek over the side of the bush to see the masculine form of Dylan wringing out his tunic. Before she saw too much, she quickly hid back behind the bush. She realized that he was quite a gentleman, not peeking as she had done. She was impressed by his character. For some reason, she had thought at first that he, not she, would be the one more likely to do something like peeking. Instead, she was the one who needed to act more nobly. It took quite a long time before their clothes to dry, even after they were thoroughly wrung out and hung properly, and Angelica made conversation with Dylan while they waited. She lay in a patch of soft grass, basking in the warmth of the sun, he in his own patch. "You used the captain's name so familiarly. How long have you known him?" "Have you known him long?" she asked. He sighed, saying, "I tried to mention this before, but I stopped because Vega looked embarrassed. I helped him get his Fulgur stone. He had completely forgotten that all the elemental stones are attainable here in Quercus Minora. Ever since we had that little excursion, we've been friends for years." Angelica asked, "So it was you who helped him get the stone? I guess you were the one who got the one for your village as well?" "Yes," he said. Okay, well, I'll go on and read this next page here, but I'm running out of time. I'll read it next time. Thank you for listening, and you can find the book on Amazon. I'm sharing pictures for more of the book on Instagram and There's a testing group on Facebook that you can join if you're interested in looking at the draft when that comes out. There's also the older draft for the first book there. And yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.